Hey everyone, welcome back to the CEO Next Door podcast. I'm your host, Mike Mayer, CEO of Main Event Digital. With me today is my co-host, Donovan Morrison, our COO. And our guest today is Chris Foreman, CEO of Marketplace.City. Welcome, Chris.
Thanks for having me. Nice to see you guys.
Thanks for joining. So, what we focus on in this podcast is founder stories. We want to really understand how you got to where you are today and how you tick. So, let's start with learning a little bit about you. Tell us about yourself.
Sure. Well, I'm as you mentioned, the founder and CEO of Marketplace.City. We are a platform that helps local governments source, validate, and procure primarily technology solutions now, although we have big dreams of helping local governments procure just about anything that they need to buy, which is actually kind of a fascinating world in that the cities and counties that we live in buy almost everything. They're running a large corporation in many senses that provides a whole range of services and requires them to buy a lot of different things. So we're trying to make that sort of an easier process, but also more impactful, not only to the communities that we're living in, but also helping the local government sort of achieve their goals of contracting locally and with historically kind of underutilized businesses, small businesses, and entrepreneurs, which is what kind of brings us here today.
It's an interesting business model. So you're helping cities buy technology and services, depending. Is it just all tech or is it services also?
Right now it's mostly technology, but
Okay,
and technology related services. So
there you go.
if you look at it, traditionally technology was something that was sort of relegated to like the IT department, and
Mhm.
now it's like every department across a city government or county government has their own kind of unique type of technology. So whether they're providing, policing services or courthouse services or jail or, a morgue, there's like
Yeah.
technology running in the background. And, there's been this explosion of, new technology companies that are out there. And especially in the last, 24 months now, since the pandemic has affected all of us, these governments have really accelerated their adoption of technology because they couldn't welcome people into their buildings, and they couldn't have their
Mhm.
employees work from their desks, and you can only have so many people in a space at any given time. And so they had to be able to do a lot more online, and they had to serve both their employees and the residents in their communities through new ways. And so it's a very busy industry right now.
How were these governments buying technology before you guys came around?
Kind of the same way they buy construction equipment or salt. They would
Mhm.
put together a list of what they need and how much they think they need, and then they would go out and ask for proposals or ask for bids, and then they would choose the cheapest one, and then that's what they would be stuck with for like the next 20 years. And just it was not the didn't translate well from buying salt to buying technology, which is changing rapidly and constantly updating with new features and functionality, and the requirements are often very complex. But the greatest thing about our industry that I really love is that all of this data is publicly available. And so, people can access information about like what their peers have bought and whether or not it's working for them and what they paid for things and stuff like that. So, our goal is to really be a data provider that sort of brings all this together and serves it up to these buyers so that they can make more informed decisions.
Well, Chris, I think coming from fellow entrepreneurs, can't say how much we appreciate folks like yourself and companies like Marketplace that help smaller companies cut through the red tape and really streamline that sales and procurement process. Obviously, it's a win-win for all parties involved, but especially for the little guys trying to make a run at it. making headway can be challenging, especially with larger public groups. So being able to shorten that sales cycle and actually see traction early is vital for a lot of small company success. So you being able to facilitate that is pretty incredible. But I would love to take it back a step. I know we will hear a lot more about Marketplace, but I think Mike and I would love to learn more about how you got started. Maybe what was your upbringing like? What was your first entrepreneurial venture?
So my upbringing, I grew up in northern Illinois, kind of a suburb of Chicago. And I'll say that kind of my introduction to government and politics came very early in my life. So I was the son of a lawyer, and didn't become a lawyer. We could talk about that at a different time, but I was the son of a lawyer, so sort of, and was involved with politics and such at a very early age. I often say I was kind of raised on fundraiser food, because it was like every night we're at eating fried chicken fingers and fried mushrooms and mozzarella sticks at some convention center or some banquet hall or something like that. And so I sort of had this exposure to politics and the government kind of very early on in my life, but I didn't really realize that or get much involved into it until I was later on in like college. A lot of my upbringing was kind of based around activities in sports, very similar. I feel like I was always kind of, playing sports growing up, and didn't, as an entrepreneur starting businesses, I'd say I first got, my start in mowing lawns as a kid. And, but, as I was, just really heavily focused on athletics, and was a, 3-sport athlete all through high school. And then in college, I sort of, started to make that rationalization that, I'm not going to be a professional athlete, and I should start, getting more into business or some other profession. So.
Got it. And you're a fellow Wildcat, right? You were Northwestern.
Yeah. I went to Northwestern for undergrad. And, while I was there, I actually got involved with several startups, both in the for-profit and nonprofit side. And it's sort of interesting kind of reflecting back on that, the kind of impact that it had on me, and opportunities that I had there. So, I could jump into that a little bit if you want.
Yeah, for sure.
So on the for-profit side, I got involved. There was a local business that was being run by, the fellow fraternity members and people that were guys on campus that helped students store their clothes and furniture over the summer. And it was a group called Student Solutions that was run completely student run out of Northwestern, and it was sort of passed down from year to year. So some juniors and seniors would run it one year, and then some guys would apply and sort of pass it along. And it was, a great business and revenue generating. So anybody who sort of ran it for the year would be able to, operate it, make the profits, share in the profits, and then kind of pass it down to the next generation. And so I was, fortunate enough to have the opportunity to kind of run that. And it was just a ton of fun of, just moving boxes around, moving, people in and out of their dorms and on and off campus and things like that. And so it was a lot of activity and energy, but and a great way to meet new people and run a business kind of early on. I also sort of had an opportunity to start a nonprofit organization. There was a nonprofit that was actually launched out of the East Coast in Yale, that was called the National Student Partnerships, which sort of used student resourcefulness and student ambition to help connect the disadvantaged people in our communities to social services that are available to them. So we actually had an office that was in the city of Evanston off campus that would, take, people in who needed help with either job training or housing assistance or childcare, something like that. And then we use kind of student volunteers to help connect them up with resources. And a lot of these were social services resources that were available to them. It's just people had a hard time really navigating the system. So maybe that was, some of my first exposure to navigating, broken government processes. But that organization, they changed their name. It's now called Lift Communities, but still very much a relevant organization. And, it was kind of part of that startups that I worked on in college.
Let's rewind for a sec. Let's go back to you started with your lawnmower business. What were the takeaways? What did you learn from your lawnmower business that you carried with you to your storage company?
Well, I think it's probably something that's pretty consistent in all the jobs that I've had, or the kind of my role in my companies, is that I'm not going to be the smartest guy working for you, or working on running a company, but I'm likely probably going to be one of the hardest working. So it's like, if I sort of learned very early on is, if I don't have the intelligence or the brains to figure something out, if I just outwork everybody else, then I might have a chance of actually being successful. So I think that's the same thing with with mowing lawns. It's manual labor. Like, how many lawns can you mow in a day, and how many people can you get to, and then moving boxes around and charging people to store things was a good way to kind of make money in college. And then getting out into the real world, I found pretty quickly that I had a kind of an affinity for sales, because you could be paid based on your performance, and really that had a lot to do with effort. We often say that success in business is 90% effort and 10% luck. And so it was always sort of thought, like, if I can't outsmart you, I'm gonna outwork you. So yeah, that's something that was probably learned pretty early on mowing lawns.
I gotta come back to the storage business and call some attention to this, because that is a business model that I've never heard of. It is similar to having a family business where you're passing it down from generation to generation, but
Yeah.
these generations are people that probably don't know each other before they start in the business, and they're passing it down every few years. Like, how does something like that even get started? And how is that? Maybe it's just all under the table. Like, you don't have to give us the details, but how do you have the paperwork to support that business? And is there any?
Oh yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
they had
Is it
systems
legit?
in place, and I mean, and you've got a range of talented people who are engineers and data scientists and economists and stuff like that, and you get them out there working on a project like this. Even as undergrads, they're pretty darn good at it. So, and you're dealing with people's personal items, so you have to have insurance, and you have to have payroll, and you have to have scheduling. And but we had trucks running all around Northwestern's campus, and we had an offsite storage facility that we would keep things over the summer. And it's you basically there was operations running throughout the year, but it was just mostly very intense, like during the first couple weeks of a school year and the last couple weeks of the school year.
Sure.
But even the
Love it.
sales of sort of scheduling people, set up tents at outside the dorms, and you're selling the service, you're selling equipment, the boxes and the tape and the bubble wrap and stuff like that, to get people to actually help them bag up their stuff. Because a lot of the students at Northwestern weren't from around here. A lot of them, they're traveling, and so they couldn't take their stuff with them when they were going back to New York or California or Florida for the summer. And it's somewhat of an affluent community, so they can afford to someone else to take care of their stuff for the summer. And I think we sort of capitalized on the convenience factor that we were offering there.
That's such a great service. Hopefully some other folks listening to the podcast maybe can start that at their local universities, because I haven't heard of it before.
Yeah, we did connect up with other universities that were running similar programs. And actually, I think that shortly after I graduated, that there was another group that started sort of actually rolling up some of these companies, so they had a consistent brand across different campuses and what have you. But yeah, it was really cool, at least while it was just kind of unique in our campus, sort of singular in our campus. So,
Chris, what was the strangest or most interesting thing you moved while you were there? Anything? I'm sure there were times where you would walk into a dorm room or an apartment and just kind of go, "Oh, this isn't. Maybe I don't want to be doing this anymore."
No, I can't think of anything offhand. Other than like people like you get exposed to so many people who and many of which have had things probably provided for them or done for them their entire lives, and you show up, you're supposed to like move someone out of their fourth floor dorm, and it's like there's a bunch of just boxes that have not been like not packed, not taped, not put together, and it's like, oh great, you guys are here, like here's my stuff, go ahead and start packing it up. And we're like, we're not touching your stuff, like you were supposed to pack your stuff. I'm sorry if this didn't but we carry the boxes. We don't like, bubble wrap all of your stuff for you. But invariably, you also like probably not like the worst thing to move, but like the worst thing to happen is that, you're, hucking, boxes up and down like 5 stories in dorms. And invariably, something slips and you hear like a box fall, and it's just that like
Oh my
terrible
God.
like roll of things like breaking as it rolls like down the stairs. And I guess that's why you have insurance, but you kind
Yeah.
of feel terrible that you're, somehow, someone messing with people's stuff.
So it sounds like in addition to helping move and store, you also taught some folks some life lessons on
Right.
during.
Little, self-sufficiency. Yeah. Yeah, along the way.
So coming out of college, you had experience both in the for-profit world and the not-for-profit world. What next? Kind of what did you take from each of those experiences, and how did that shape your decision on the career that you pursued out of school?
Yeah. I think that it was kind of a whirlwind coming out of school, because I graduated early. I actually had like gotten to some like part-time jobs, and I'd actually decided to major in political science here. And so that was sort of like my, continued sort of path into government and, interest in politics. And but it was interesting because I had decided like I didn't want to actually work full time in politics, even though I was political science. And I had started going down like a legal route, and decided like that wasn't really for me. And so and part of it was like, well, I'm not going to be a professional athlete, so I'm not going to like pursue sports. I don't want to be a lawyer. I don't want to work in politics because I don't think there's a whole lot of money in that. Which there there is now a lot, but it didn't seem like it was at like the time when I was leaving. And so I was like, I want to get into business, and it was a completely random experience to where I had a part-time job bartending at an Italian restaurant, and one of my regulars would come in like every Tuesday night. It was either Monday night or Tuesday night, and this guy's name is Brian McGarry, and we would chat, and I was his bartender, and I was making cash, and he was like would ask me about what I was doing in school and stuff like that. And he said, I don't really get this, like you're a senior, you're at Northwestern, like you're not really sure what you want to do. And I was like, yeah, well, I want to get into business. And he said, well, why don't you come work for me? And I was like, what do you do? I said, well, I'm the CEO of this manufacturing company here in town. And he lived in Toronto at the time and was commuting into town every single week. And that's why he was at the bar on Monday night, because he like flew into town, he would have dinner, and then he would work the week in Chicago. And I said, well, okay, sure. And so he offered me a job, and I went to work for that company. And like it was just kind of like this completely random situation. I got in on the marketing department. It was a great use of my political science degree, but I was got into the marketing department, and the marketing department got really involved with kind of internal like customer management. And they were going down the path of like deploying their first customer relationship management system. And I had being more of I guess younger person on the staff in this like random manufacturing company, like it was a lot like The Office. Frankly, it felt a lot like that. I had more of an understanding of technology and being more of like a digital native. And so I found myself being the global project manager of a CRM deployment of Oracle software. And, I was based in Chicago, but the company's global headquarters were in outside of London in the UK, and sort of, found myself traveling the world to, the UK and to Amsterdam and other, parts of the country, rolling out this technology product, and thought, like, well, this is really cool. I love how, this, technology deployment, and how the impact it has on the entire business. And this is something that was, it's technology, but it was, basically a CEO level project, and everyone, knew this was happening. It had such an impact on their ability to serve customers, and so that was kind of cool. But it was, I did not, I felt like the company was, just not moving the pace I wanted to move, and I wanted to be able to work, as hard as I could work, and have, a make more money doing that, have it, like, be paid for that level of performance beyond, just an annual bonus. I wanted it to be a little bit more transactional, and so that's where I sort of made a decision to get into sales at that point.
How long were you there, and where'd you go from there?
So I was there for, I think, about 2 years, maybe 2.5 years. And I decided I wanted to go into sales, and so I moved to a company called Rise Time that was based in Chicago. That was a technology consulting company, and so they worked. They had a couple large technologies, and one of them, one of those technologies was one that I worked in my last company, which was Microsoft SharePoint, which is somewhat of a sort of ubiquitous product in large enterprises around the world now. But at the time, it was nothing. It was given away for free by Microsoft, and very little people used it. And but we used it for the project management of of our CRM rollout. And the company that I went to work for did consulting on that technology. And so I started, to get more of an understanding of, like, Microsoft technologies and things like that. And, that really helped me later on in my career, because after being at that company, Rise Time, for, I think, about a year and a half, I followed my then girlfriend, now wife, out to the East Coast. And because she had gotten a job, actually a residency, for optometry with the VA in New York City. And I left my job to follow her out there, because I wanted to get a little change of scenery, growing up in Chicago and being, going to school in Chicago and living there my whole life. So I followed her out to the East Coast, and sort of started the kind of next phase of my career out there.
Interesting. So it sounds like between growing up as well as college experience and then first couple jobs out of school, you experienced and saw a number of things. So I'm curious, how did you, and there may be additional steps still to tell, but how did you eventually end up working with city and state governments?
Yeah, that's a great, yeah, I'll try not to make that too long-winded, but when I got out to New York City, I didn't really know anybody. And, it was sort of a rash decision to say, hey, I'm going to quit my job here. This is my opportunity to get out. It's New York City. Like, if you can make it there, you can make it anywhere. And it's a big city. I should be able to figure it out. And so we got out there, and I actually worked a number of sort of gig type jobs, and I was in some tech sales, some, service, and working, still, bartending, and, like, trying to figure it out. And it just so happened that, like, LinkedIn was, like, starting to come on the market. Like, it wasn't like a big thing. So we're talking, like, 15 years ago. And, in my LinkedIn profile, I had published that I had worked previously with this Microsoft SharePoint product. And I could say that I'm probably one of the, limited people in, 2006 who had, claimed any, work or experience with Microsoft SharePoint, particularly on the sales side. There were developers and engineers and stuff. And so I was recruited by a company that was based in Jersey City, called AvePoint. And because they had a product to actually, in one of the first products out there to back up and restore data in Microsoft SharePoint. And so they reached out to me, and I was offered a job there to come and be one of their first outside salespeople. And that sort of started a 10-year run at AvePoint that, started with me being like kind of the first outside salesperson. And AvePoint was, just a, single digit $1 million a year company, to over those 10 years, growing into different management roles. And, eventually the US government used this Microsoft SharePoint product, like I said, almost exclusively for a lot of data storage and collaboration. And so I sort of started up a government business for the company, which became a wholly owned government subsidiary, which became, in public sector, became the largest sort of single industry that the company served. And so our tools really sort of took off in that sector. And I was, fortunate enough to be a big part of that growth within the company. And so I dedicated a lot of time to the, growing our business in the public sector, both at a federal and international, and also then state and local space. And stayed with that company through 2016. And by that time, I had to make a decision that, I made the decision that we were leaving New York City, and decide either I'm going to move to probably Washington, D.C. and sort of continue that business, or I was going to move back home to Chicago and, continue working, but also probably start a family and, do things like that, be closer to home. And so we chose to move back to Chicago. And I, basically, decided that it was probably time, after having an apartment in DC and traveling there every other week for several years while living back in Chicago, it was time to kind of make a shift in my career and kind of move on to something else. So I left there in 2016 and, looked at the world as, wanting to, start something new, start something that's original on my own. And kind of came back to the public sector, and especially came back to state and local government because I really loved it when I was doing it at AvePoint, and really am, passionate about, creating efficiency and helping governments to, help their residents and create better quality of life. And that's what kind of led me to create Marketplace.City.
When you created this technology marketplace for cities and local governments, were you modeling this after another business you knew about? Was there other marketplaces, or was this totally original that you came up with?
Well, I wouldn't say it was like totally original, but I was sort of designed it to be the antithesis of anything that was out there already. I was really jaded by the way that the industry currently operates, and that is through this really outdated model of third parties that help governments to transact. So oftentimes, and we experienced in our company at AvePoint that, there were some times that you had to leverage these resources like state contract holders, national cooperatives, resellers and things like that in order to get your products purchased. But, the best experiences we had is when we could make the case directly to the buyer, and the buyer saw enough value to just contract with us directly without having to go through one of these third parties. And so the vision for Marketplace.City was to draw direct connections between the buyers, so the actual government users who need these things, and the people who are manufacturing it. So, the developers, the software developers, hardware developers themselves, and to try to eliminate the reliance on all these people who stand between those two parties, which are the most important parties here. It's the people who are the innovators who are designing the technology, oftentimes small emerging companies and startups who are trying to break into the sector. And it's the buyers who are trying to get things done. And everyone else that comes in between at some point may have had more of a necessary place in the process. But for me, they're less important to the overall process now. They're there as a legacy structure, but it's ripe for disruption. And that was where Marketplace is here, is to draw direct connections between the manufacturers, the F points of the world, the companies that were developing the tech, and then the buyers, the actual local governments, without all this, these people in between who are just kind of have their hands in the transaction and are kind of pulling margin out of it.
Yeah, it sounds like you did a good job of cutting out the fat.
Yeah.
And pulling people out of the process that really weren't adding value. So on that, how do you monetize? How are you staying in business? You just do, is this a nonprofit out of the goodness of your heart?
Yeah, well, it takes a while to generate revenue. It's not a nonprofit. So because we do have to make money, we do also take percentages out of the transaction. But our difference is that our percentages are transparent to everybody in the process. So one major issue is that as a buyer, you might be buying something from a third party, but you have no idea what they're buying it for. You have no idea what their markup is on those products. And that's their whole business, is to kind of shield that from you and not tell you how much profit they're making on the deals and how they came to recommend this technology to you. And you can often sort of jump to the conclusion that they're going to recommend something where they make the most amount of money. And so, that was our first step, was that we were going to be free for the buyers to use. We were only going to get paid when there was action performed, when there was actually value created, and then we were going to be fully transparent out of what we were taking in the deal. So I think that was sort of the trade-off you have, is that you have to make money somehow.
Of course.
But that, we were wanting to be as transparent about that as we could.
So unique. What other businesses are like that? I've never heard of one.
No, winning on transparency. People, it's amazing how much people appreciate just that simple piece and what a difference maker it can be.
Highest level of ethics achieved. Congratulations.
Yeah. And we talk to a lot of vendors, and particularly like startup companies, who are just extremely protective of their pricing, and extremely reticent to sort of show examples of them selling their products, because I was early on in the process and we had to discount a lot here, or it was very competitive, we had to beat somebody out here, and so we can't share our pricing with them, because then they're going to want to have that pricing and they're going to race to the bottom. It's there are people out there who will try to take advantage, but I'd say for the most part that it's better to share that actual experience, to explain where this is coming from, and to be transparent about the process you went through, because it's important for the buyers that your vendors are viable for the long term. The buyers can't have the vendors going out of business, because they're making no profit. They need more, they want more features in the product. They want more value to come from those buyers. They want long-term relationships. And so, they're not just here to squeeze you down, to, your last, penny. They're here to kind of invest in your long-term success, because they need you to continue to supply them. So we often say, transparency will set you free. The more you share about your transactions, about your product, and about your process, the better relationship you're going to have with that buyer, and I think a longer term, more viable relationship.
Just to clarify, so if I'm a buyer in a government, when I'm looking at a piece of software that you're offering on Marketplace, am I able to see what other governments have paid for that software?
Yeah,
that's amazing. Yeah, what other marketplace has that available?
Right. So it's a great thing about our industry, is this data is publicly available, right? So that the biggest challenge is going and getting it. So it's highly fragmented, it's because it's sitting in siloed databases around the world, around the country, as to where the people paid, but it's available to get. It's just that people haven't really put the work to go and get it. So I think that's what Marketplace really stands to, to be to this market, is this great kind of aggregator of the data, and then to find different ways to use that data to help influence the decisions to be made.
So, Chris, a number of our listeners are aspiring entrepreneurs, and one question that comes up with some frequency surrounds co-founders. You had this idea for Marketplace, and there are many other people out there who have this brilliant idea that they want to execute on, but it's a lot to go at it alone. How did you meet your co-founders, and how did you know they were the right people to go into business with?
Well, it's a pretty good story because when I first had left my company, I was sort of in that in between stage. I first left at that point. I was in this in between stage before starting Marketplace.City, and so I was kind of formulating what I wanted to do next. And I knew I wanted to start a tech company, but I wasn't exactly sure what I wanted. So I actually had launched a consulting company to start like providing some advice and working with some of the previous customers and vendors that I had, and just starting to kind of figure it out. And one of the first customers I got with that company was an organization called UI Labs, and they're a smart cities lab that they had on site there, and that's on Goose Island here in Chicago. And it was really at that lab that we had started kind of looking at the piloting of new technologies inside cities, and all of the kind of sort of constraints of doing that and challenges to selecting vendors and things. So it was really like in that experience there of actually doing it hands-on for the city of Chicago, where because I like got involved with this project around green infrastructure, which is trying to reduce flooding in different parts of the city. So like we were out in like the south side and west sides of Chicago, deploying weather stations and soil moisture sensors to see how often or how well different like green infrastructure was collecting water when it rained in Chicago. So it's like this really cool project that we got really deep into, but helped to really kind of understand the challenge that we were going to be solving with Marketplace later on. But we had sort of made an internal kind of proposal that this should this type of a database should exist, that it has the reference information, has the customers, has the vendors, and that different governments can sort of call on this data. It wasn't necessarily in the cards for the lab at that point, but I had sort of started thinking, well, I kind of want to do that. I think this is what I want to do. I think this is the thing I want to build. And my co-founder happened to be one of the managing directors of the lab, and he had sort of found out through the grapevine that I was, working on this, and had approached me to say, hey, I kind of like this idea. I am ready for a change myself, and I think I want to team up with you. And so it's kind of crazy, but you sort of grow up like with friends and family and colleagues and coworkers and people you go to college with, and that you sort of think like these are the people that maybe one day I'll like start a business with. And I ended up starting a business with a guy that I knew like a month, like less than a month. And then we've been in business for almost 5 years. And his name's Andrew Watkins, and he is my sort of primary co-founder. But Andrew also had kind of the key to getting this off the ground, which was a relationship with his college roommate, Cameron Kozan, who is our third co-founder, and who had built the original prototype of this product for New York City. So Andrew sort of came into the picture and said, I think your idea is great, but there's also, this prototype that's out there that needs someone to take it and commercialize it. And so we sort of decided like, quickly, like went out to New York City, met with Cameron, looked at the product, met with New York City, the mayor's office, decided like, okay, we're going to do this thing. And then, got help from New York. I was meeting a bunch of other cities that were going to be a part of this as well, and kind of our early adopters. And then just said, hey, let's do it. Started the company, launched the product as a standalone, and then sort of took it off from there. And it was first, kind of very, very bootstrapped. We paid for a lot of the development ourselves, and then we started to raise a little bit of money from friends and family. And then later on in 2019 raised another round of more kind of angel investors, and then now we're doing our first equity round now, so going out to raise more money.
Well, quite the journey, and best of luck with your current raise. I've been through that, and it is a quite stressful experience. So, wishing you the best there.
Yeah.
So, what's next for Marketplace? You closed the round. What's in the future for you and the company?
Yeah, so I think we want to continue iterating on the what we do with the data that we're collecting. I think that this data set that we have is very unique, and so we want to continue opening up the channels that bring the data in, and the tools to how we interact with that data, and then how our users can interact with that data, and how we can leverage it to provide value into the market, to really affect as many transactions as possible. Obviously right now primarily focused on technology-based transactions, but also moving around other types of services and products that that governments need to buy. I think as we sort of look at it, is sort of like any and all things like non-payroll. Like we're not really into how governments hire contract contractors or hire their employees or what have you, but we're looking at having like non-payroll services and products. And so it's trying to expand into those other areas, but also, to grow internationally or into other, other sectors as well. So it could be beyond just state and local government, but other forms of government, other industries, regulated industries, and things like that. So it's kind of growing from there. So I think that we've demonstrated ability to be able to grow this, but I think a big part of it is sort of also understanding what our identity should be as a company. I think that was something that was difficult for us because as we're small and we're, we had like a decent brand because we had originally got this start with New York City, and we got, because it is so different in the industry, like a lot of people want to know what it is. A lot of people want to partner with you. A lot of people want to help you and things like that. And so there was just a lot of attraction to like different types of business models or regions, or who your customer is and what it is that you're actually selling. So I'd say that was a challenge throughout this process, kind of identifying that, where we were building things as we were selling them, and that we probably could have spent more time sort of understanding that, but also who knows, like you have to sort of experiment and fail before you really decide what your true product is. But I feel like especially in our time, during COVID, where we were almost forced to, think more like domestically in the US and really think about our, who our true end customer is with the local governments. And because we were at a time where they needed so much, during COVID, and there's so much pressures being put on them from what, they're, just skyrocketed into the spotlight of, doing daily press conferences on the updates of COVID and lockdowns or testing or vaccinations and things like that. And so we just saw like that is our end customer. At the end of the day, this is who we are serving. We want to help vendors to reach those customers as well, but at the end of the day, that's who we hold up as the primary customer, and that we're not just going to be a consulting company. We're not just going to be a workflow technology company. We're a data company, and we're gonna build this data resource so that it can serve that end customer. And so I think that's something that took us a while to really kind of understand about in our journey, and sort of realize what our identity was. And I think that's hard for a founder. Like some people, it might be pretty straightforward. Like I make mattresses. I'm going to sell mattresses. But I think with a tech company, there's so many options. There's so many things that you could build. There's so many different areas that you can sort of move into. I think you have to be like very focused in order to find that success.
Chris, you said it yourself that one of your superpowers is working harder than everyone else around you, which I really appreciate. But you have a family, I assume.
Yeah.
You mentioned a wife. How do you balance? What are you still playing? Are you still a 3-sport athlete? And what were those, by the way?
Yes, I'm like a 10-sport athlete now.
Yeah.
I have so many hobbies that but yeah, those three sports were football, basketball, and tennis. And I wasn't really a big tennis player. I was more of a baseball player. But after playing football and basketball, I just needed to give my body a break. And so I didn't play baseball in the spring in high school and went with tennis and loved it. But yeah, I think that's a great point to make, Mike, because yes, I have a wife and I have 4 children, and
Holy
they
cow.
range the ages of 3 to 9. And
Wowza.
I I don't have the time to outwork everybody anymore. And so I think that as I sort of got older in my career, I'm not old, but kind of, in this sort of middle stage of my career, I had to understand that I need to work more efficiently instead of just working harder. I'm still not going to be the
Right.
smartest guy out there, but I have to be more focused. And I think that has been a challenge because I naturally get distracted to shiny objects. And so I think that's something I'm constantly working on, is how to kind of maintain focus, how to better manage my time that I have during the day, because it is limited. I think it's always going to be a work in progress. I'm always endeavoring to go to bed earlier, and to get more sleep, and to focus on my family more. But it's also life. So I think it's always a work in progress.
You can only do what you can do, but balance is important.
Yeah.
So we don't want to take too much more of your time, but and Donovan may have more questions, but I just really have one final question for you. And we like to leave our listeners with some nuggets of wisdom. So, anything that you can advise and guide people on that you've learned through your entrepreneurial journey that you'd like people to walk away with?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a couple different things. The first one is that if somebody is sort of thinking about starting a business or becoming an entrepreneur, I would say do it, and do it sooner rather than later. And for me, I'm a type of person that, when I think of doing something, if I don't do it now, the chances are I'm not going to do it. So at least I'd get something started now. And you'll see that it's one of the mantras that I live by, and that I sort of govern our company by, is that time kills all deals. That if the longer time we take to make a decision or to do something, the higher likelihood it is of failing or not happening at all. And I think that we take that kind of mantra to our customers as well, that if the more time you take to make a buying decision, the higher the likelihood that your project's going to die, because time is of the essence. And so I think that, right, for people who are thinking about starting companies right now, the entire world has gone through this disruptive experience. And I've always believed, especially in running startups, that disruption, even though pandemic is a terrible kind of disruption, but disruption also does create opportunity for people, because the status quo is being changed and put into question. And so I think there are new, in this day and age, that there are so many opportunities, especially in the technical world, to be able to launch a technology company, with cloud technology and low code software development, so that you can start creating value and finding customers. In the services space, being able to hire gig workers around the world, using different contractual or part-time contract worker platforms and things like that. That we can employ people from a different countries and different time zones, and that don't have to work in our offices now. That used to be sort of an expectation. So there's we're at an incredible inflection point as a world that entrepreneurs can really capitalize on, to be able to start a business at a low cost. I mean, and if you're gonna fail, I mean, it might as well be now, because before the new world order is set, and everyone else has moved ahead. So
Good tips. Thank you. Time is of the essence, people. Get started on your business today. That's the important message I took from that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Donovan, should we wrap up? Any final words of wisdom from you, or?
No, just really appreciate the time today, Chris. I think this was incredibly insightful, both for Mike and I, as well as our listeners. So it was great to have you on, and just really enjoyed hearing more about your journey.
Yeah.
Best of luck to you.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, it was fun to kind of rehash a number of those things. Like, you really realize like how all of these, experiences that you have kind of lead you to this point, and that you can sort of tie back a lot of that to values you've learned over the years. So
one day at a time. Don't get overwhelmed. Right.
Absolutely.
All righty. Thanks again, Chris.
Thank you. Take care.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Everybody got a dream, let me show you all love. From an idea, working it into a startup. This the show that you need, what more could you ask for? Never know who become the CEO next door. Tune in, every episode insightful. The type of vibe you will want to subscribe to. Let's go. Hey.